you see some of these like AI movies, short films that are being produced, and you know, they still suck. But like the impressive quality of being able to get like some sort of cinematic theme in the lens, you know, having characters, having a real, you know, plot point or whatever, it's only going to get better.
Right. That's right. I particularly focused on text, you know, trying to get the silo of ufological data. I mean, AI still has a garbage in, garbage out problem. And so I was going to manage that problem by only putting what I consider to be high quality information in. I mean, yes, I have books and periodicals, but I also have FBI files, stuff from the National Archives and things that are
primary sourced.
Primary sources, right?
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, and so that was the impetus for that particular exploration into AI, and I still use it, and it's still a powerful tool to start people down a path.
Oh yeah,
to investigate.
Yeah. Now I'd gotten you off of the Cape Girardeau case.
Oh yeah,
like an hour ago, right? And we got deep on Majestic and everything, which was good. But I know people out there didn't want to be left hanging on that. So what happened in that one?
Yeah. Well, in one of the Majestic documents, there's a mention of the Missouri 41 crash, and Stan Friedman had heard about this case from Charlotte Mann, who is the granddaughter of Reverend Huffman. And Reverend Huffman was a Baptist minister in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And he lived on Main Street, and he was called to give blessings to 3 dead, allegedly cloned aliens. They looked identical.
Blessings.
Yeah, that's
they wanted that.
Yeah, that's what you know. In 41 in Baptist world, it's blessings rather than
we're gonna bring you to Christ in death.
That's right. So that was his. That was what the local police asked. So he was driven in a squad car about 15 minutes out of town.
They put a little blanket over his head?
Yeah, no, they didn't. They didn't put a blanket over his head. Yeah. And he was driven out of town into a field, and there was sort of an acorn crashed burnt saucer and 3 dead aliens, and he gave them last rites or blessings. And
did he describe what they looked like?
No, he not in the testimony given to Charlotte Mann from her grandmother.
That's kind of an oversight, though. No, like I feel like that's the first thing I would do. I'd probably like say I saw 3 fucking aliens. Here's what they look like. No.
Yeah, the story of Charlotte Mann. I mean, Charlotte Mann got her her information from both osmosis throughout her time with her grandfather, Reverend Huffman, and grandmother, Flo Huffman. They'd talked about a little picture of an alien, and occasionally she heard whispers about this crash and so forth. And it was after Reverend Huffman had died, and Flo Huffman was basically on her deathbed in the last few days, that Charlotte Mann pressed her grandmother for details about this event. And over those few days, she, or Flo Huffman, provided Charlotte Mann with all these details about the event. And that's where this story comes from. And it's written up in the book, Magic Eyes Only. And I interviewed her on camera several times, and it's the subject of a 2002 or 3 MUFON conference proceedings. Rich Dolan's interviewed her a couple of times. But anybody that ever talks to her, she's very sincere, very genuine in her responses. And so Reverend Huffman was called out, provided blessings, and then the military showed up and swept up the bodies. Everybody's sworn to secrecy, and it's all taken down to Sykeston base, which was where they trained a lot of World War II pilots, which is in Cape Girardeau, which is, 30 minutes down the road or so. And
that's why it's called the Cape Girardeau.
Yeah, Cape Girardeau was where it was at. And And so then you back up and say, well, what investigation did you do, Ryan, to analyze what was going on here? So you have the testimony, you have a document, you have the witness. And so what I did next, and Paul Blake Smith continued on in his book, Missouri 41, that he wrote about the Cape Girardeau event, is that I went there, went to the Baptist church and found pictures of the reverend and the church at the time, and tried to figure out on a map in a 1941 road map, what is 15 minutes driving at certain miles per hour? Imagine you're a police car going and try to identify the various zones or fields that could be the right locations. And then I cross-referenced that with historical aerial photography at the National Archives. So I got 1939 aerial photography and 1942 or 43 aerial photography, and look for places where there's disturbances and try to isolate where this crash could have occurred. And so the fundamental challenge with all crash retrievals is precisely where and precisely when did it occur. And if you have those two clues, you can make a lot of progress figuring it out. So then I went to the National Archives and tried to figure out, well, where was it? And I had a few spots. And then you go back to Cape Girardeau and you discover, well, one of the areas is a housing tract now. And then I took Joe McMonagle, one of the...
Wait, Stargate?
Stargate. Oh, yeah. I know Joe well.
You know Joe well.
I know Joe well.
Can we get Joe in here?
He
went on my friend Sean's show.
He might ask. We could ask him.
Yeah, I would love to.
I know him. So, I mean, Joe and I did two investigations together. One was we went to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, into a target field that we had with metal detectors, trying to find where the crash site was.
And for context for people, Joe was a remote viewer.
Yeah, he was Stargate and Grill Flame. I would say
Grill Flame.
Grill Flame. That was the other. And so the three best remote viewers in the world, to our knowledge, were Pat Price, Ingo Swan, Joe McMonagle. Yeah. And Pat Price and Ingo Swan are both dead. Come
on, Joe. Let's go.
That's right. He's down in Virginia, I think. Near Charlotte.
That's dangerously close.
Yeah, he's in
Get
Charlotte.
him here easily.
Yeah. Him and his wife Scooter, they're at the Monroe Institute. But he's sort of retired. But we went there and we tried to find where the crash site was. And we weren't successful. We found a few horseshoes and other things in these various fields, but we weren't able. I'm sure the wreckage was sort of all picked up effectively.
Yeah, you're going there way
Yeah,
after.
and then you look for the fire department logs. You could go to the fire department and find the historical logs and look through 1941. And so this is how you investigate a crash retrieval.
But if Joe was investigating this with you, is he trying... I would imagine, I'm using my imagination here, like he's trying to use his remote viewing skills. Well, yeah,
we did some
targets.
We had some targets where we thought they would be, and then we went on ground truth and so forth. You're not always successful, but we did work on that. I have his report, I'm sure, someplace. So this was, and then we actually, speaking of Joe continually, we also investigated another event in outside of Death Valley. It was I can't remember the date, but anyway, we went there and we searched around with metal detectors and did some psychic work, and so there was a few adventures with Joe. 10, 20 years ago when he was younger. And that was fun. That was fun.
I'll bet it was.
And he did a lot of work for me on various targets where I had, well, like in one of the Majestic documents, in the White Hot report, which is on majesticdocuments.com, there's one whole blacked out page, where there's nothing there. And somebody had redacted it all. And I had him do a blind target on...
A blind target.
Yeah, basically said, here's the blacked out page. What does it say? And he basically wrote what it said.
And what did he write?
He said that this was about hieroglyphics and alien communications and the investigations of how the government was working to decipher the alien writings inside craft. So that was a particular target and a particular result. I mean, I don't have any way of proving it. It seems logical and credible, and I feel confident coming from Joe that
because it's Joe. You're
yeah,
saying.
because it's Joe. It's remote viewers.
Now here's the other thing though, and I gotta ask this. It's the same thing when Lou was sitting there.
Yeah,
I gotta ask him too because he comes from the government. Joe comes from the government. Are they out here playing a joke on all of us to get us running in the wrong direction? Saying that. In this case, Joe's like, oh yeah, hieroglyphics, aliens, pyramids, the whole bit's there. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying the guy is not credible as a remote viewer. He may very well be. It's a very strange subject matter. That's why I'd love to talk with him. But do you ever worry about, him maybe not doing the Lord's work and maybe doing daddy government's work?
No, not. I haven't. From my personal interactions with him, he's always been a straight shooter. Has he done government work for the government? Yeah. And, but I think it's pretty much, he's a Vietnam veteran. He's sort of like,
they're built different.
They're sort of like, fuck you. And, I don't think he's manipulatable there. And so he's done a variety of projects for me that have been impressive, stunningly impressive at times. And I've used other remote viewers for various tasks.
Like who?
Ed Dames, a name that you probably never heard of. He's probably gone away and sort of he was also part of the Stargate program. Paul Smith has done, Skip Atwater. I mean, just name people that have been in the program before. So there's a variety of remote viewers that are talented. But my conclusion on psychics,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, my conclusion with psychics is that you really need to hire and find the very best people to work with, because it's a signal and noise problem. And if you don't get good signal, you're going to get a lot of noise.
Yeah, I'll fully admit, I get really skeptical of stuff like this. Now, listen, when Joe went and talked with Sean and like you look at that guy's career, it makes you think twice, because this isn't like the old lady on Main Street in a wearing a gypsy cap or something.
Yeah.
So you do wonder about it, but also how when you look at like Stargate allegedly being disbanded, and I want to say like 2003, but fact check me in the comments, people. It was allegedly like 2 decades ago. They said like, oh, it's gone. Do you really think that if the government had that, they'd actually get rid of it? I feel like if they did in fact have it, and they might have, and this was like a real thing, and these guys like Pat Price and Joe could really do this, they got it. It's like, we'll never do that again. Of course they're fucking doing it.
Yeah, I agree totally. Yeah. I mean, you would never throw away an intelligence tool like that.
Right.
Now, it's just one of many sources that a CIA analyst would use. He'd use overhead, he'd use human int, and he'd use all the tools. And there's the psychic input too. Yep. So on intractable problems, it's very useful. Crash retrievals are one of the toughest things. I mean, the government and the MJ-12 and the control group, this is one of our primary missions.
Yeah.
Is it crashes, it lands. I don't care what country it's in. We see it come in. We're in there as fast as possible, recovering the stuff. And until you show up with, a few tanks and armed guards saying it's Bolivia's,
good luck with that.
Right. Or actually, one of the cases in Mexico, the federales were there, but it was the story goes that the Navy SEALs or the Special Forces just killed him.
Just killed them.
Just killed them. Yeah.
Not even the cartels got there
first. Yeah, this is some of the work from Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte in their book.
Can you explain this one? I need to know more.
Yeah, I think it's the Comey case. I have to look at the book to see with the actual date. But it was it's a crash in Mexico. The federales get there and are transporting it away, and the U.S. government team shows up and wants it and basically takes it, and they kill the people. So it's sort of blue on blue or blue on,
They killed them.
They killed them and took the stuff.
Not Chihuahua, Mexico.
No, I think
that wouldn't be it. I'm looking through your
Chihuahua,
through your table. Table of contents here.
Yeah, it's we can find it.
But the SEALs came in.
Well, I don't know if it was SEALs or Special Forces or somebody.
And we whacked them.
Yeah, whacked them. That's the report from other researchers, not me per se. I think Ruben Uriarte and Noe Torres wrote a whole book on this particular Mexican Roswell, the Mexican Roswell.
Yeah.
There was a History Channel special.
Chihuahua. That's what it is.
It's the History Channel special that actually I was in. You can probably still find it.
Can we pull that up? Chihuahua. I have it over here, Leslie, but that's not on the screen. Chihuahua, Mexico UFO. Let's see what Wikipedia tries to tell us this one is. Again, I'll let you respond. But that would be kind of wild to me. I guess I wouldn't put it past us to go in there. Type in, go to UFO sightings in Mexico, the third one. Let's do that. Okay, so 1974, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So according to ufologists, local residents reported a mid-air collision between a UFO and a small airplane near the town of Coyame.
Yeah.
On August 25th, 1974, followed by a military investigation and cover-up. However, historians say that such UFO reports were likely prompted by the 1974 crash and military recovery of a Cessna aircraft involved in drug trafficking. Don't you love it when the cartels get in the middle of UFOs?
That's right. Well, that's a good cover story to me.
Yeah, well, it's a great listen. My buddy Paul Rosalie lives in the Amazon, and there's a lot of these uncontacted tribes there. And so, he was trying to freak me out about all that when I was down there with him. But one of the things he was explaining to me is that, like when you see planes fly over where they are, smack in the middle of the Amazon, like just over the canopy, he's like, obviously those aren't commercial jets. These are what we call narco traffickers.
Yeah.
And the fucking uncontacted tribes look at them and they think they're boxes in the sky sent by God.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, so to them it's a UFO. So I see a little tie here.
Yeah. So anyway, that's one example of deaths associated with ufology or crash retrievals. I dedicate the book to those that have lost their lives to UFO secrecy. And there's the Sandia Engineering District technicians in 47 that went out to Roswell to handle the bodies, and they several of them died of profuse bleeding in the nose and mouth from handling the bodies. They're going out with their best hazmat suit of that era to pick them up and put them in the sort of caskets, so to speak, and ship them off. And I think that was the first tip-off that oh my goodness, these things are potential biological weapons, and that continues on, and that's one of the impetus for my dad's book, Alien Viruses that he did. That was a fun one. Yeah,
I mean, if you're talking about a species that's coming from another dimension at the very least, or a different place, of course they have a total different. It's common sense. They have a different biology, and biology is the most dangerous thing that exists on this planet. So why wouldn't it be dangerous from somewhere else?
Yeah,
for sure. What was the thing in? I want to say it was 1939. Senator Cardell, something like that. He in D.C. I probably have that wrong. Maybe it started with an S. I forget. But it was definitely with a C or an H. H. But he allegedly in the basement of the Capitol saw a few alien bodies or something like that. They were or, like alien parts existed in vials of formaldehyde.
I think I've heard that story, but I don't have any, deeper knowledge than you do about it.
Yeah, that's see when I hear stuff like that, because then I would think that guy would have written like a whole memoir on it or something.
Well, there's lots, he may have. I mean, has anybody gone to look for his files? I mean, I want to go to Las Vegas to Harry Reid's archives and go through that. I mean, he's got to have a lot of information there that's, I mean, there's lots of subtle clues. There's no smoking guns, but there's circumstantial and supportive evidence everywhere that could be brought forth.
Do you think some of that, and I asked this of a lot of different guys sitting in that seat you're in right now when we're talking about this, do you think some of that is that these civilizations could simulate it ahead of time? And in English, what I mean by that is if you are either one, an extremely advanced extraterrestrial species from far away that far exceeds our abilities here, or future humans from way in the future who far exceed our abilities here and have insane powers to, distort time, whatever it may be. Couldn't you like simulate not crashing or simulate, who, if I'm going to be seen, only these kids in the woods are going to see me and no one else is going to see me, so no one will believe them? Couldn't you do that as your own type of experiment? Because you would hypothetically be so far advanced and perfect, and I'm using my imagination here because I don't know what that would fully consist of, but like you'd be so far ahead and perfect that you don't make mistakes as simple as like what to us would be a plane crash. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, abductions of the mind or real abductions is pretty stealthy, and there's no evidence. But people ask, and senators and congressmen ask, well, I'm from Missouri. Why in the hell would these crash? Why? How can they be so advanced as to screw up so badly and land on planet Earth? And so, as David Grusch has mentioned in his testimony, there's a certain percentage of events that end in mission failure.
Even for them, though.
Even for them.
That's what I'd ask him.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that we value human life and they may not. And so these very well could be more disposable, cyber AI clones or biological clones that are just exploring the galaxy. It's more efficient to do a biological thing than a mechanical thing,
right?
Because and then there's the potential for weird natural phenomenon, like a good negative lightning bolt is 10x a positive lightning bolt, the most common type, and New Mexico desert is notorious for lightning. And so that may not have been prepared for that, or maybe overwhelmed their navigation systems, or the testimony of Colonel Corso in his book, The Day After Roswell, where he said,
EMP?
No, turn off the radar. Let me, he had an interaction with an alien and said, please turn off the radar so I can leave. And that's actually may do a better job of explaining it.
Yeah, that sounded wild.
Yeah.
That was real casual. He had an interaction with an alien, said, please, turn on the radio.
Right. So in his book, The Day After Roswell, he highlights an interaction that he had. It was, he had his radar operating, and I think he was in a mine or a cave, and an alien appeared, and he said, "Friend or foe?" And a typical military guy, and the alien said, "Neither."
Ooh.
And then he asked, well, what's in it for me or something like that. And he said, a better world if you can. The alien said, can you turn off the radar so I can leave? And he said, well, what's in it for me? And the alien responded, a better world if you can take it. Words to those effect. I don't think I got the quote exactly right, but it's in his book.
Speaking the language.
Yeah. And so I mean, I don't know if he mentally heard it in his mind or actually verbally waves or so forth, but that's in the book The Day After Roswell. But, Colonel Corso is very interesting as being, hey, firsthand witness, Army,
Yeah.
reverse engineering. You can find his documents in the National Archives. His claim was that we were reverse engineering integrated circuits and fiber optics and integrated circuit. Night vision goggles was the other claim. But there's many other technologies that allegedly have been reverse engineered.
Yeah, how Putoff speculates it was EMP. And if I get him in here somehow, I'd love to get him to really expand upon that. But he's like, we were fucking around with EMP or something, and something in the physics of their anti-gravity craft couldn't handle that. And
no, it's very credible theory, be it radar or EMP or what, electromagnetic radiation and weird. I mean, if you were to take a radar from 1947 and do a spectral analysis of it, it would be extremely different than what's on the F-16 that's operating today.
For sure.
Yeah. So it may be something to do. I mean, it was an analog thing back then. It's a digital thing now. So it's just a different thing. So that was the little sidebar on why they crashed. So, and then we try to shoot them down with SAMs and for, anti-aircraft fire or deliberate seeding of kindergarten planets is another thing. Hey, we know how this thing happens for planet Earth. When they explode a nuke, we have to dump some tech on them, because when we do that, then they focus more on education. They try to figure out gravity control, and they work hard. They can't succeed, and they advance their technological curve, and they eventually uplift their society into a more stable environment that allows them to join the galactic kindergarten. I mean, just speculating. So that's the scenario.
Yeah, it sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Because hypothetically, if we don't know, if all this technology is hidden by intelligence and the private contractors working with them who are by extension, therefore intelligence, then we don't know if they're working on all this, and that's why these bombs haven't gone off. We don't know if in Russia, which obviously has had political changes over time, but countries like Russia or China are working on that. I guess it would make sense, but you bring up the nuclear point, which always comes up, and it always has to, because it's pretty heavy. When you think about it, if that's the deal, but. My friend Jesse Michaels points out that a lot of he was the guy I was showing you right before.
Oh yeah, and I know Jesse.
You know him personally?
Yeah, I've talked to him on the phone a couple of times and traded emails.
You gotta do some content with him.
I'd love to. I want to.
But yeah, I'll talk to him. But he always mentions, he's like, when you're talking about the military guys on these nuclear bases who witness this stuff, these are dudes who have to report if they took an ibuprofen in the morning. So you're talking about the most sober guys that exist in this country, arguably. And they're the ones who report to see these things. And, it gets weird when you start talking with Lou Elizondo. I don't know. Have you heard his take on the nukes thing?
No, I remember I watched a little bit of your interview with him.
Yeah. So he does not necessarily think that the potential aliens fucking with our nukes is benevolent. He thinks it could be malevolent. And I said, why? And basically what he was getting into is they've been turning them on, in addition to turning them off sometimes. They're showing us they go both ways. And my retort to that would be, isn't that to just kind of show us that they're in control here, and that they want to do this, and therefore, if they really wanted to set one off, I mean, it's been 80 years, they haven't done it yet. They could do it in a second if they have that power.
I agree totally. I mean, I think it's far more of a, your systems are weak and ineffective. Yeah, we can turn them on and off. You need to pay more attention. You need to be very careful with these things. You don't want to have an inadvertent issue and have them blow up or launch one and create a problem. When we exploded it in July of 45, I believe that the ETs were still cruising around, but the whole universe suddenly took notice. Oh my goodness, this little kindergarten planet just got the nuke, and we need to pay more attention to them. They're on a trajectory. It was an inflection point. I mean, this is sort of classic thinking about, how the
Yes.
civilization unfolds.
Yeah, I used to have in my old studio in my parents' house, I had a picture. I have it out there, but it's not in the studio, where there were two pictures. One was a an explosion test at Bikini Atoll,
Oh yeah.
and then the other one below it was a redo of the Sistine Chapel, Adam and God's hand, but the hand of God is actually a robot hand. And the reason I like this dichotomy, because the bottom is what I get concerned about with like AI and things like that, potentially like taking over our being and how we are. That's scary to me, and I think we need to not do that. And the reason I had the Bikini Atoll on the top is because we dropped these two bombs on Japan after getting to this science in 1945, and in the almost 80 years now since then, the world has had all these weapons. And yes, we've tested them in places like Bikini Atoll. These tests happen, in some respects, you could say, all the time from different countries. But no one has ever used it on each other. And the idea that in a world filled with insane egos, dictators, tyrants, people who get into, let's call it what it is, pissing matches with each other and just aren't afraid to, play score. And the score is how many bodies does your country lose versus mine. The fact that we've never used that feels like some sort of divine intervention. Now, could that just be wherever God is up there, just somehow being like, yeah, listen, I know that Putin guy's not great, but like he's not going to press the button, or could it be, some intervention from these?
It certainly could be, but I'll tell you a story I heard from, secondhand from James Erwin, who was an astronaut. And he basically said that when he was up on the moon, he had a vision given to him of 4 nukes going off in the Middle East. And I just, okay, that's sort of his input. And you look at today, with what's going on with Iran.
When did he have this vision?
I think Apollo 11, 12, whatever, he was on the moon. Okay. James Erwin, he's one of the first astronauts.
So years ago.
Yeah, in the 60s.
Yeah.
But I think he wasn't, and he told the story to several people, including my friend Rick Broom, who told me, and I look today, here we are in October 2nd of 2024, and the Middle East could easily go a couple nukes. And I think that might be the, I hope it doesn't happen, but I think that it's probably going to take 1 or 2 nukes going off in hostility again to remind the Earth that we need to get rid of them.
You think that? You think
I just think it's a scenario that's they're planning for, and the question is what would happen.
What scares me is the guys like let's put a time period on it too, but we'll expand that. The guys like the Curtis LeMays of the world. Okay, back then, they believed in the 240 to 60 theory. And that's definitely not what they called it, but I'm just using what were alleged to be their quotes behind the scenes, which is that, well, if Russia hit us, we'd lose 60, but we'd hit them and they'd lose 240. We win by 180.
Yeah.
Right? And so, yeah, we look at that during an era of people where, they probably blew off a president's head. But who's to say it doesn't take more than a few people thinking like that, right? There can be thousands of great people in the government, and I have no doubt that there are. And then you just have a few people in positions of power who just fucking suck and have that thought, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly, to your point, maybe they put that into into practice, if you
Yeah,
will.
I mean, what I thought was interesting was Erwin's comment that it was the Middle East, and we're sitting there with Iran. Okay, I I find it impossible to believe that Iran hasn't purchased a suitcase nuke out of the vast missing stockpile of suitcase nukes from the Russian government, and that they have a few bombs, and if they were to set one off, there'd be a retaliation, and people would go, "Well, this is not a good idea anymore." Is it sort of, you can see a limited exchange in my mind. Not that the U.S. and Russia or other major powers would get involved. So I but as Robert Salas has often said, there's
Yep.
20,000 nukes on planet Earth, and if they go off, you better be underground for a few decades.
Yeah. Yeah. It
And it's
gets
just
scary.
it is scary. It is scary.
Well, it's to your point, it's strange times we're living in right now, especially. It feels like a lot of the rest of the world is on the brink, which means we're also on the brink because we're a world power.
Hmm.
And by proxy, everyone's involved in these different conflicts that are going on, and
Hmm.
whether it be in Ukraine or in the Middle East, it's definitely it definitely makes you have to look at the simpler questions about, us as a collective rather than us as these stories that we call borders.
Right.
With
And
all these countries that pretend to not be a part of the same human race at the highest level of stuff. And to me, like, the highest level of stuff is, oh, don't nuke each other.
right.
You know?
And it's interesting you sort of philosophize on that. I'll bring it back to the Majestic documents. There's one of the only sort of think pieces in the Majestic document trove is a memo written by Einstein and Oppenheimer. And it's a 4-page piece that's on the majesticdocuments.com website. But it asks the question of can you settle on planet Earth? Can the ETs settle on planet Earth? And his response, or Einstein's words, were to the effect of, if planet Earth is devoid of political unity, they would have the right to colonize, but not on traditional lines. And it goes on for a paragraph or so. But I thought that was interesting in that, here's Einstein being posed with this question of colonization of planet Earth by alien species and what to do about it, how to address it, what to think about it. And that's, I thought it went to your point.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
And that's the hard part about this conversation. On one end of the spectrum, you can get the guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson who say we're not interesting at all, and they don't want to study us. And sometimes Michio Kaku, who's been on this show, will go there. Now, he's obviously a lot more open on some of the other stuff, but he'll be like, would they really try to study a squirrel with a nut like we would? My thought is maybe, because like sometimes I'll sit there, let's use the squirrel example. Sometimes I'll sit there and there's a million squirrels outside, right? I
Yeah.
don't sit there and watch most of them, but one day a squirrel does some weird shit on like the telephone lines and I'm like, "Oh, wow." You know what I mean? So who's to say you don't get an alien once in a while going, "Oh, wow, look at that."
Well, I can guarantee you that I can probably find 5 squirrel PhDs that specialize in nothing
Yeah.
but squirrels. And the gray squirrel, the brown squirrel,
Yeah.
all squirrels around the world, there's a huge body of literature on squirrels. I suspect that there's probably more literature on squirrels than there is on ufology.
You might be right about that.
Yeah. And so, or other little 4-legged creatures.
Sure.
And so, absolutely, there's got to be an ET race that specializes in emerging planets like ours.
It's just interesting, though, looking at like what we view as, say, of the era, the smartest person, like an Einstein, speculating on these things. And obviously among us, like, he's so smart, but even his ability to speculate as a human being bound here to Earth, having to try to put himself in the mindset of that which he doesn't know, it's no different than even trying to speculate what God thinks,
Right.
or something like that. It gets really strange. And it's not to say like I don't want Einstein speculating on it. If anyone's going to do it, I want him doing it. But like we all of it is purely hypothetical in that way.
And surely shallow.
Yes.
And not as robust as the truth.
Sure.
So yeah, I found that the Einstein Oppenheimer memo in July of 47, actually it's June of 47, I think it's written, but is a very interesting read on the Majestic Documents website. I mean, one of the other thoughts that we haven't really gotten into, and I'd love to talk a little about,
is
the whole notion of what is the giant secret. What is the government really controlling and hiding? And it is gravity control. And how do you manipulate gravity? And this has fascinated me for the past 9 months, and I've been doing lots of research about it. And there's very little mentioned in the Majestic Documents about gravity control, other than, there's a description of a neutronic power plant in the Majestic Documents in the White Hot Report, but it doesn't really go into. It's more of like how to create electricity or something like that. But there's clues everywhere about the nature of gravity control in the sightings, not necessarily the crashes, but they're certainly in the crashes, but in the sightings where you have these electrostatic wicks, where you have a craft and it's got cables hanging down with electrostatic balls on the ends, or long sort of sweeping sort of a shark fin like thing that I think of the case in of Eddie Laxton in Temple, Oklahoma, where this is an Air Force officer going to work, drives around the bend, and sees a UFO, sort of a teardrop UFO. Teardrop, yeah. It was like it's like 75 feet long. It's more like stretched out, like a stretched teardrop. And actually, my friend Michael Schratt, has it in his book. Let's see if I can pull up a picture of it. 60,
like a digital re-rendering of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Socorro's 62, but
you're talking about Socorro?
No, I'm talking about.
I was gonna say
66.
Must have missed that.
No, you 66.
James Fox talked a lot about Socorro when he was in here, episode 138. That one is.
Yeah, here we go.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, no, this is Eddie Laxton. So Eddie comes around the corner and sees a man in front of a craft. And he gets out of his car, walks over, and the man sees him and gets back in his craft and takes off. But a man with a cap with English letters writing on it, and numbers TL197 are written on the side of the craft. And then he hears this low hum going off, and he sees all the landing gear. And this is an Air Force guy who says, clearly this is a man-made craft that I saw, in 1966, and a very credible witness. And this was reported to Project Blue Book, and another witness saw this craft fly away too. But this is just one of many cases that point to man-made UFOs and man-made craft.
Yeah, well,
and that's the thing that fascinates me, is that I started to think, well, what's the history here? There's all sorts of newspaper articles in the mid-50s about gravity control, and you see that it's sort of there's a lot of activity in the 50s, and then it suddenly disappears in the 60s. Conveniently. And so there's many cases where this long shark-like fin at the electrostatic wick, or there's other cases in Chula Vista in Northern California, where this saucer with all these hooks comes down and all the static electricity, and then the witness sees it fly over and hook onto a high tension power line and makes it glow red, and then zips off and comes back, and it acts in a weird way that is man-made and not ET. ET doesn't need hooks and electrostatic wicks and none of that stuff. So this is the giant secret, is I think that in somewhere in the late 50s or early 60s that we figured out the equations for gravity control.
Yeah, see, when you say we, I need to also possibly define that and stick on my little tinfoil hat right here, backed by the good old FOIA requests of the government that have been released over the years. But you talk about specifically, like, when we look at the 50s being where we figured it out, a very interesting event happened in the 40s, which you know about, which was obviously World War II. And specifically, there was another very interesting event right after World War II called Operation Paperclip, where we took all these Nazis and we brought them over to America, stuck them in Huntsville and some other places, and said, show us rockets and show us everything you got. And I do wonder sometimes, and this is like in the back of my head a question. It's like, obviously, most of these guys were just some of the worst war criminals ever, and drank the Kool-Aid and believed in like these psycho Nazi beliefs or whatever. But I do wonder sometimes if the scientists, as the war was waning on, had just enough humanity, and that is giving them the minimum amount of credit possible, to say, if they got figured out some crazy things with physics, to say, maybe this Stash motherfucker shouldn't be the one in control of this. All right? I do wonder that sometimes, because you can look at it and realize Wernher von Braun was the head engineer at NASA when we went to the moon. A Nazi put us on the moon, you know, and that was very public too.
Right.
So what's happening privately?
Yeah, well, I mean, and in the Majestic documents, there's many references to Ernest Stronghold and many other paperclip scientists that were involved in. But yeah, anyway, there are many examples of craft that I think are man-made, and I think one of the things that really draws me in is the comments of Ben Rich. Ben Rich, who was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works.
Oh, yeah,
for 15 years, Lockheed Skunk Works, and in his retirement in 1993 at UCLA, where it was his alma mater, he said on stage, "We have the technology to take ET home, and it won't take a lifetime to do it." He said, "We found a mistake in the equations and figured out how to do it." And when he says found a mistake in the equations, in my mind, the ETs aren't giving you equations. It's human beings that are giving you equations. So then I'm trying to try to understand, what was the trajectory of the science going on, and it was Lockheed. Well, it was the Glenn L. Martin Company in the late 50s that before it became Martin Marietta, which later became Lockheed Martin.
Right.
So the Glenn L. Martin Company in 1950 started a group called the RIAS Group, Research Institute of Advanced Studies, I believe. And that's on Wikipedia. And it was headed up by this guy, George Trimble, who is the arch villain in Nick Cook's book, The Hunt for Zero Point. I don't know if you ever interviewed Nick Cook. You ought to interview him sometime. Jesse Michaels just interviewed him in a recent podcast over in the UK, I think.
I'm going to have to check that out. I'm not familiar with that.
So the point is that Trimble and his team put together this huge A-lister team of theoretical physicists, theoretical mathematicians, and worked for many years on cracking the code of gravity control from an intellectual point of view, from a gravity control design. And I think they succeeded, 1960 plus or minus a year. And that capability, at that point, the Glenn L. Martin Company in 62 merged with Marietta. And Marietta was doing all sorts of deep underground bases and underground facilities and nukes and things like that, power plants. And so when those two companies merged, that's when I think the secret government spawned. That's the point at which the gravity control secret was figured out and went rogue or went proprietary or went offline.
And it gets gray area too.
Oh yeah, it's all speculation on my part, but the evidence so far points that they have this incredible scientific brain trust that figures out gravity control equations, and once you have the equations, you can start to implement it and build technologies.
Well, this was another thing that Lou talks about that has me thinking and wondering about how deep this goes. He gets into the fact that these companies, these private companies, meaning like they're not with the government, were given these contracts decades ago for UFO crash retrievals. Just like how the government gives out defense contracts to companies like Lockheed Martin to, help with weapons of war, they'd give out contracts for a company like Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman to go in and basically be the men in black, if you will, when shit goes down and bring back the craft and be in charge of it. Which Lou points out gets weird when you then consider that they therefore, these private companies have been given custody in this top secret program of these alleged alien crafts or not of this earth craft, whatever you want to say, to the point that they can come to the government and be like, "You're not read in on that." So it's like the clowns are in charge, the prisoners are in charge of the asylum now.
Right, and who's really running the world? Is it the 1,500 people that have these top secret R clearances instead of QR? So I think that the secret management is outside of government control. If the president asks, they ask, "Well, why do you want to know, sir?" And he says, "Well, I think there's a threat to national security," and the response is, "We've investigated.
There is,
we've investigated. There's no threat. You're not entitled to know." And even in one of the majestic documents, they say on the change control page that not only do you have to have an authorized executive order from the president, but you need approval of Majestic Security and Intelligence Command, so to declassify stuff. So I think it's a combination of both. There's probably classified law that says, the president can ask for stuff, but until it gets approved through these other channels, that you can't know about it. And so the president is somewhat in the dark about what's going on.
Yeah, you used a term earlier that's been used on multiple podcasts I've recorded recently, and it was nice to hear you say it, where you talked about the compartmentalization of government.
Yes.
And it's such a great point because I'm just going to use some names right now, not literally, but like as a figurative here. You could have on one team within the government Hal Puthoff and Jacques Vallée, who are both geniuses and know a lot about the physics of this stuff and maybe have been read in on some crazy shit over the years. And then you could have another team of insanely great physicist A and insanely great physicist B, and they're working on something entirely different. And the two, they know they exist, but they don't know that they're working on these respective programs for the government. And one is a total, moated area of research, and the other one's a total moated area of research. And then things don't get shared. But there's some sort of, not to be sinister about it, but like just for the imagery here, there's some sort of puppet master above them, and it's a very small group or a person who is like charged with being the only person to know that these two things exist. But he's another cog that knows these two things exist, and there's someone else over here who knows only. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely,
it's like a continuous exponential curve of secrecy.
And that's how they do it. I agree totally. There's skiffs, and then there's other types of skiffs.
Other types of skiffs?
Well, I think one of your other guests highlighted that was a special type of a skiff within a skiff.
Yeah.
And one of my friends at Air Force Office of Special Investigations said that there's something called CIA Level 7, which is apparently where the alien discussions happen. I don't know. I'm just repeating what he told me, but he wrote it in his book called Meridian, which it's a fiction, but it's a very fun book that involves aliens and an interesting story. But there's all sorts of levels of classification, and I think that the classifications for the intelligence community are different than the Atomic Energy Commission. If you have a top secret SCI clearance, that's a different animal than if you have an Atomic Energy Commission Q clearance or R clearance. And so those are different worlds, and they may not mix. Or they might.
What did your dad or even Stan and Freeman have to say, theorize, either based on speculation or on even some intel maybe they had received on which companies or which companies were involved with the crash retrievals and what they may or may not be working on? That's a really broad question.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the usual suspects. If you're saying who has the gravity control secret today and worked on it, I would say the Aerospace Corporation, nonprofit in Pasadena. I would say the Carlyle Group, which owns EG&G, which runs a lot of operations out to Area 51. You would think of Northrop Grumman with their efforts. You'd think certainly of Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, or some spin-off of that organization. The Raytheon, potentially. There's classified pockets everywhere that may be working on different parts of the reverse engineering situation. But, knowing what the saucer skin does, I don't really care.
The saucer skin?
Saucer skin. I don't really care, the subtle aspects of a particular crash saucer are sort of ancillary in my mind. The crown jewel is propulsion. It's the gravity control. That's the thing that is the holy grail, the secret that they're guarding endlessly. And that's the thing that's been figured out in my mind, and that they're protecting and hiding. And there's a very limited number of people that know what that is and how that works. And so that's sort of my perspective on the technology situation for crashed hardware and UFO parts.
What did you think of, you mentioned him earlier, but when Dave Grusch came out and went public with this, which does then involve a form of retrieval, we'll get to that. It was the Magenta case and everything. But when he comes out and says, I guess just for context right now, comes out and says something like, this case in 1933 was in Magenta, Italy, and it involved a crash UFO. Magenta's just outside of Milan. Mm-hmm. And at the time, you had fascist leader Benito Mussolini in charge of the country. He sends in a renowned scientist.
Marconi, I think.
Yeah, Marconi. Mm-hmm. And some other people, and they get this out of there. Allegedly, Benito thought that this could have been some sort of crazy weapon emanating from Germany or England or one of the countries, but they store it somewhere. I want to say in Lombardy, but fact check me in the comments on that. And wherever it was stored, it was somewhere else in Italy. And when the United States later invaded Italy with the Allied forces in the 40s, somehow they were able to, as they took control of the country, get possession of this craft and take it back, which is what David Grusch said, you know, was some of the evidence he had access to.
Yeah.
Now, you've covered the Magenta case long before David Grusch came out with this publicly.
It wasn't in my first book. I mean, it was Grusch's testimony that made me sort of pull that one out. And I think there were some Italian researchers that did a lot of work around that case. What I find interesting about it is that if it really happened in 1933, and I'm sure it did, that no doubt it went to Nazi Germany, because Italy and Germany were aligned as axis in the war, and so I suspect that Hitler and his team of scientists were all over it, trying to figure out how it worked or where it worked, and the Allies may have recovered it from Germany rather than Italy per se. But I'm just sort of speculating. I don't have any data. And then there's all sorts of comments or beliefs that the Germans, you know, the Nazi Bell and all so forth had some sort of gravity control and had craft. I have a lot of reserved judgment about that. I'm pretty skeptical that Nazi Germany had flying saucers, and you know, went to Antarctica and all that. I want more evidence. It's definitely in my neutral basket. So, I mean, the 33 thing was great, and I applaud Grusch for, you know, kicking me in the pants, so to speak, by showing up in front of Congress and saying, "Yeah, we have crash retrievals." And I was like 18 years ahead of time. I was saying crash retrievals, and before me was Leonard Stringfield. Leonard Stringfield did a lot of, you know, AKA Webster.
He was an Air Force guy too.
He was an Air Force guy with photographic memory. Had all these great connections. I think some disinformation was probably fed to him, but he did a great job of in investigating and collating all sorts of material and information about crashed UFOs, and I leveraged his work. All his work is in my book as well.
Yeah,
I mean, these various cases, and
didn't he have like a experience himself?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember the details of that either. But it's fascinating that like a guy who was then that prolific in the space came from the Air Force, where this shit happens.
He was an intelligence guy, and he was very skilled at it. I talked to his wife, you know, once on the phone, and he allegedly has all these files, primary source files that have sort of disappeared. So that's been part of the challenge of his material, although many of his secretarial office files are all at MUFON headquarters, the Mutual UFO Network. And Michael Schratt has gone through them. He did this great book, Dark Files, where it has a pictorial discussions of all sorts of various cases.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.